So we were trying to follow up on the theme of last week, which is we're really on this month talking about the gut thing. And it is so interesting that so many people that we are seeing and reaching out to us today, recently, I mean, gastric distress is a huge complaint. I don't want to say it's a complaint. I mean, it's really a presenting issue, but it's quite it's disruptive. It's quite a significant challenge in people's quality of life. It's not like they're just saying I got a little cramp today. I mean, this what we're seeing is it's really compromising the quality of people's life day in and day out, week in and week out, a month in and month out. Okay. Sure, but
like somebody who can't even swallow.
well, yeah, I mean, people who are listening, we know this. I mean, it's like, it's like people just, the bloat, the distension, the pain, the cramping, the constipation, the diarrhea, the irritable bowel syndromes. I mean, getting to the point where, I mean, everything that people eat seem to trigger a response. And so they are like now in anxiety mode because they're anxious about the foods they eat, and then they don't eat because they're trying to get relief from the pain, but then they're losing weight, and then they're concerned about losing weight, and so they're anxious about that, and they're also anxious about what I can eat and can't eat. I mean, I get it. So there is this whole, conundrum. So it's not like it's just gut, right? It's all the emotional components around the gut. Now, I want to talk. Yeah, which is why kind of today's subject matter a little bit I wanted to talk to you about is the like we want to talk about really is the gut-brain axis. And so if anyone who's actually spoken with me, they know that I often will try to emphasize, right, is that, when we have gut issues, we have gut complaints, right, we typically are going to go see a gastroenterologist. If you go see your primary is just going to refer you to the gastroenterologist. And there is a role for that, right? Because, they're going to, examine you and probably encourage a person under those circumstances to do what? An endoscopy coming from one end, or a colonoscopy from the other end, right? Or maybe even in some points do a biopsy to check for celiac disease. And in last week's episode, right, we talked a lot about the diagnosis of SIBO, right? Small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. I don't want to, go back there, but again, the testing for that, right, is either a biopsy, which is the gold standard, which is very invasive and very costly, and still, what's the treatment protocol with SIBO? It's antibiotic use, which never gets to the underlying root cause of the problem, right? You just knock off some bacteria, and 2 months later, you're back to square one again, and usually worse off because of it. But that's all they have in their toolbox. The other testing is the breath test, which I explained to you last week is really a very poor test, right? It's so inconclusive and too many false positives. So SIBO is very real, but it is overly diagnosed, right? And even if it is the case, what I'm trying to lead into is why. Again, root cause is why does the person develop SIBO? So in your gastrointestinal model, right, is they're looking at a person strictly at the gut and trying to just treat the gut through antibiotic therapy. So if you go into natural healthcare, we all do it, right? You can talk to functional doctors or integrative doctors, or as you as a consumer, go to the internet and Google stuff, right? You're Googling gut stuff. And what is the treatment going to be, right? You're going to try some dietary changes, and you're going to try a whole smorgasbord of probiotics, right? Hoping that those probiotics are going to be the answer, right? And very often people are doing these things and they are still confounded, right? And they hear things, well, if you got SIBO, don't take the probiotics and take the probiotics and do the low-fat MAP diet and all these different things. And you're like spinning and you're going crazy. And I hear. So I'm trying to present today, and I haven't gotten to it yet, right? But it's called a gut-brain axis. Now, again, I have a background in functional neurology, so this has been on my plate for 15 years, right? But I never look at a person who has gut problems and only look at their gut. You have to look at them from a brain down perspective. You have to look at a person neurologically, right? So my point I wanted to get today, we have few more weeks to even go deeper into this, right? But in my world, right, there's a language we call it it's referred to as north to south approach to a gut issue. So your gut, if I can kind of use this analogy, is pretty far south from your brain. So there's a lot of, you got to give your brain, it's going to go all the way down, right? So what we wanted to talk today about with the gut-brain axis, right, is something known as your sympathetic and your parasympathetic nervous system. That's what we'll just kind of focus on today a little bit. Many of you have heard of that. Many of you maybe not have heard of that. So let me just put it in so everybody's on the same page, right? Your brain is an organ that really is the master organ, right? We can all agree that your brain controls everything, right? So your brain, your nervous system, extension of your brain, kind of a two-way street. So you have your sensory system, which is one way of information going to your brain. So when you feel discomfort or pain in your gut, that's a sensory input traveling up the nervous system into areas of your brain where your brain can perceive that. And your experience of pain is in your brain, right? Sensory is one way in. Motor is movement. Me speaking right now is motor, right? Moving your arms, just movement. And that starts in your brain and it's one way out. So sensory is one way directionally up to the brain, and motor is one way out from the brain. But then you have your automatic, or what is called autonomous nervous system. And that's really what runs the show. That's working on everything behind the scenes, everything that is working automatically. And that's a lot, right? You're not thinking about how to get your kidneys to detoxify things 24/7. It's working behind the scenes, right? So everything works automatically. Or how your heart beats, even breathing for that example, right? But everything that goes on behind the scenes, right? All the biochemical processes are controlled and regulated by what is referred to as your automatic or autonomous nervous system. And that system is divided into two divisions. So one is known as your sympathetic division. And your sympathetic division is what drives your, what is called your fight or flight response. And what that means simply is your survival response. The other division is known as your parasympathetic. And your parasympathetic division, okay, is what is referred to as nurturing and for growth. Okay, so you have survival and you have nurturing and you have growth. Okay, those are the two divisions. So basically is your entire inner organ system, which is known as visceral, right, is innervated predominantly with your parasympathetic nerve chain, right? It is, so your gut specifically is parasympathetic. This is why when we eat food, we're digesting food, right? Our nervous system should be, right, parasympathetic dominant. And that way it brings blood into the gut so that we can digest food and absorb its nutrients, and our gut should be in a relaxed state in order to do that, right? But your sympathetic nervous system is your fight or flight or your survival mechanism. I know it's a silly analogy, but I always say to people, what is more important, surviving or reproducing, right? And it's surviving. You can't reproduce if you're dead, right? So the survival mechanisms override growth and nurturing, right? You can't have them both going on simultaneously. And since today is the anniversary of 9/11, it's an easy analogy too, because many of you may remember, some don't, but prior to 9/11, right, the economy was really booming. But where was our defense? It was low and we were vulnerable to an attack. Then what happened immediately after 9/11 is our defense system, right? Port authorities, everything. Now you take your shoes up at the airport. Our defense went screaming through the roof. And what happened to the economy? The growth bottomed out. That's the yin yang and seesaw act, right? Now you bring it back into healthcare. So when you need sympathetic, we need protection and growth, right? But we want like a nice, even kind of a balance to this thing. And so what we're seeing, maybe even since 9/11 and now coronavirus and just life in general, is that, everything is hyper, we're just in a world that we live in sympathetic dominance. I mean, there's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We live in a sympathetic dominant world. And just even the fact that we have access to social media and access to information 24/7, and we're on our cell phones, is we're getting stuff coming at us that's really hard to process. And so what happens is our bodies go into a defense posture and we activate our sympathetic nerve chain. So we're in a fight or flight response so much and so often and so long that it kind of gets stuck there. So when we are in a sympathetic dominance, and his blood is pulled away from the gut, right, and other organs, it's actually even pulled away from the frontal lobes of your brain and shunted back to the limbic system of your brain, because your limbic system of your brain is your survival area of your brain. Okay, right? The primordial emotion in your limbic system is fear, because fear is survival. You're supposed to fear, and my example is the saber-toothed tiger. If you don't fear it, you'll do something silly like stick around and you'll probably get eaten. So fear is a defense posture. But if we're pulling blood away from our frontal lobes and we're shunting it back to the limbic system, and we're doing it over and over and over again, it gets really kind of hardwired, right? That limbic system is kind of running out of control, and we're living in a fear state, and that promotes anxiety, right? But all the blood is being pulled out of the gut simultaneously, right? Because it's got to go to the muscles so you can run and fight. Run away from the beast or fight something, right? But if that's going on and going on and going on and going on, right? Now your gut can't function properly. You're trying to put food into your gut, and your gut is rejecting it. It's like, no, 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 no. We're not supposed to be eating. We got to run and find something. And your musculoskeletal system is in a constant state of tension, right? Short term, okay. But imagine if like 24/7, you're in a constant state of musculoskeletal tension. Is your musculoskeletal system can't sustain that, and it starts breaking down. And what do? We complain about chronic back pain and chronic neck pain and chronic shoulder pain and muscle pain, right? And we're seeking all these various treatments and modalities, including chiropractic and physical therapy and all these different things, right? And not really getting much resolvement. Why? Is because neurologically we're in a defense posture, right? So again, what do? You can't just, as a provider, you just can't consider gastric or abdominal distension and bloat and food just as a gastric thing, right? So your doctor, your gastroenterologist, 9 out of 10 times is ruling out pathology, which is a good thing. So the scopes rule out, God forbid, cancer, right, and other things, right? But you're often left with terms like gastritis and IBS and SIBO and all these different things, right? And then you're trying to approach it singularly with the treatments of either antibiotics or probiotics and or combinations of these things, and often left disappointed at the end of it all, right? And again, and then the anxiety and moods and things are getting worse. Right. So, if a person sees me and their complaint is anxiety, right, I still analyze the health of their gut relative to the anxiety. But if the person's coming with a gut problem, I still have to analyze the relationship of their brain and their nervous system and how it's functioning to their gut problems. And oftentimes you have to do combinations of things, right? So it's not that the probiotics are not helpful, right? But how do you rebalance the sympathetic and the parasympathetic? How do you do that? Okay, so maybe we should leave it there, or should we go on a little bit? Because there's other things I can go on a little bit further, because, right, I'll leave you one more thing, because many people I think have heard and are going to ask about the vagal nerve, VAGAL. Your vagal nerve begins in your brainstem. It begins in your brainstem. Okay, it's interesting. So your vagal nerve, it begins in your brainstem, and your vagal nerve is your predominant parasympathetic nerve. Okay, and that's what meanders down. It's called the wandering nerve. It meanders down. It actually splits and it innervates every organ in our bodies, but predominantly the gut. So that's your vagal nerve to your gut. Okay, and it's interesting because as recently as just a few years ago, new evidence has come about in scientific world saying that they now know where Parkinson's disease begins. So Parkinson's disease, right, is a neurological, progressive, degenerative disease. It's the degenerative disease of our brains. But they now have quite good evidence that Parkinson's disease begins in your gut. Boom. Right. So again, gut to brain access, right? I think I've mentioned in previous episodes, there's a whole new model of depression, thankfully. So finally, and even in the psychiatric world, it's in the psychiatric journals, right? They're starting to look at depression not as only as a chemical imbalance, meaning that we're going to give you a chemical drug, an antidepressant, to manipulate your brain chemicals and blame it on your genes. Finally, there is a new model of depression, which is known as the model of inflammation. Okay, inflammation, meaning that the depression really is a symptom, you know, caused by inflammation. And where is this inflammation coming from? Very often it's coming from the gut. Okay, other places too, maybe we'll get into that, right? But it's kind of a new model, which, is really kind of exciting and powerful, because now, if we start understanding the mechanisms behind inflammation and what's really driving inflammation, and make some adjustments and changes to calm that down, we can now start to change and impact and kind of, calm down the depression, okay, without the drugs.